The sun is shining, the birds are singing. I've got a fresh cup of Little Brown Dog coffee, and it's Saturday. Again, I'm an idiot. So a week ago, I started the project of replacing the torque tube with an open drive rear end. I thought I was prepared enough to make it work with what I had and what I'd purchased for said swapification of the rear ends. I was wrong, and over the course of the week I have speculated a little bit. I wouldn't say learned. I did a ton of research trying to figure out what exactly went wrong, and I spent more money on more parts. Like more parts that I have, but hopefully more Ryder parts than the ones that I have. So let's do a really quick review, and then we'll have a moment of truth to see if the new stuff fits more better than the stuff what I tried last week. And then, you know. So let's talk about some of the pickle that I got myself into. In order to do a transverse spring, front or rear, on an early Ford, you need a bunch of parts that will work together to mount the thing. And there are some variances in the different springs that you can get, stock springs, etc., etc. But the critical stuff you need to know is your spring width, your spring eye, and that stuff has to match your shackle, right? So this is a 2-inch spring, 2-inch shackle. The rears are 2 1/4 inch shackle, right? That's why that exists. The next thing you need is your spring eye. So the spring eyes in most aftermarket springs that I've ever come across, this is actually a Posey spring that I bought in 2006, has a 3/4 eye with a 7/16 whoop-de-doo. And the bushing takes up the rest of the space. What I learned the hard way was the stock spring on the 4678 Ford has a larger eye, and the shackle actually has a 1/2-inch bolt. What was in there was some random homemade shackle. I did find on Dennis Carpenter these shackles that look like they would fit the original stock setup with a weird metal bushing for the eye in the original spring mount on the original torque tube rear end. However, I was already pretty invested in parts. I had bought the Speedway kit that had a different mounting setup than the original rear end. It came with a set of brand new 2-inch shackles. Also, it's worth noting, shackles also have different lengths. So in my hand is a 2-inch shackle, and there is a 2.5-inch, 2 1/4 inch, 2.5-inch shackle. But it's basically, this adds extra length to your shackle, which will indeed function to lower the car just a little bit, but will actually treat it like your spring is longer. Now, that's a good segue into spring length. It's a huge pain in my butt, personally. People don't measure leaf springs consistently, so I think the idea is the best way to measure it is from the center point to the center of the eye, and then you double that, because that actually has the length of the spring. The problem is that's just not how everybody does it. So when ordering a spring, it is best to order from a company that you can get a hold of. So last week, I bought and installed a kit from Speedway Motors that said it would help you mount an open drive rear end in a 35 to 48 Ford. It came with a set of shackles that match their mounts, which are welded onto this rear end, at least tacked on. And then the other end of the shackle is supposed to hold your spring. Well, it became pretty clear pretty early on that this does not match this. So not only is the bushing different, but the diameter of, I don't know, the bolt part of the shackle is also different. That said, I made a choice. There were a few options to proceed. Either Hot Rod Millworks made a new reversed eye leaf spring, so if I wanted to make this a lowering spring, I could just buy the main leaf from them, which has the stock eye, Dennis Carpenter sold stock shackles, and I could have lowered this spring, gotten a new shackle set, and in theory that would have worked for the kit that Speedway sold me that was supposed to work. Because I already had new shackles, I decided to go with the cheapest option available. So this is a brand new 2.5-inch wide rear spring from Johnny Law Motors. You may know them from eBay. They're a really inexpensive spring distributor. So back in the day, Posey's was the only game in town if you were going to buy lowering springs. Either you took your stock spring to a spring shop, or you did kind of something at home, or you bought a Posey's Super Slide spring. Their website's still up. It's still the same as it always was, meaning they haven't updated it in 10 years. I couldn't get any prices off their website, and Speedway is out of stock in everything Posey's. And even if they weren't out of stock, man, is it expensive. $300-400 for a spring. That's fine. Maybe it's fine. But in stock on eBay were all of these manufacturers or distributors, whatever. One of them was Johnny Law Motors. They're also a company called Helix and whatever else. But I actually called them, and I got a human who sent me through to tech, and the tech line guy had to call me back, but he called me back and we talked through spring options. I was shocked. This guy had a pretty good sense of these products. Full disclosure, I bought one for the front of this car, and the way that I measured it and the way that they measured it were incorrect. So the one I have on the front of this car is too long. So we're already gonna have to replace that. I really didn't want to do that again, but I needed an option, and at this point I wanted to buy as few new parts as I possibly could, considering how many new parts I had already bought. So I was getting like to the quickest solution based on what I already purchased to use. Namely, the Speedway kit that was already purchased and partially installed, and the shackles. All right, so here comes the moment of truth. So we set up our spacing on our Speedway rear end mounts, basically like stock, because I thought I was gonna use the stock spring. So I measured the distance from perch to perch on the axle and replicated that, 46 3/4-ish, center to center. The man on the telephone told me that they measure their springs across from eye to eye, and the one you want is 5 inches shorter than your perch width. Now, I was on the phone and I said, well, that's assuming what? 2.5-inch shackles, right? That's not assuming 2-inch shackles. And he said, that's correct. And I said, okay. Which makes sense, because in theory, that gets you a completely flat line on your shackle, and then when you load the car, it'll push it down, and you want your shackle, in theory, once your car is at ride height, to be at a 45-degree angle. And why is that? And it's pretty simple. The idea is that's halfway through the travel. So if the wheel, so as the suspension travels, it can travel both up and down, right? So if you're like this, there's not a lot of room to go up. And if you're like this, there's not a lot of room to go down. It's that simple. That said, I've measured this spring. It comes disassembled like this, completely unloaded. It is the measurement that we discussed, which is 41 3/4. Now that is a little different. Now our stock spring, loaded the way that it is closer to 43 inches. So I don't know. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know if this is a softer spring. I don't know if it's gonna fit or not. But today, we're gonna try to get this spring mounted, and you know, with any luck, it'll work. I really wanted to, because the man was very nice on the phone. The measurements are, in theory, accurate. And the price? $146 shipped. You heard me right, $146 shipped. Plus, these nice people sent me a coupon of $25 off my next order over $100. So, considering we're gonna need some more springs, it's a pretty good deal. Anyway, you know, I can't talk up the company, Tui. actually install the spring, but that's our goal here today, to make sure that this is actually going to work. A little apprehensive about it. Now that said, my Speedway kit came with 2-inch shackles. What we discussed is 2.5-inch shackles. I may take the bushings off of this and use the older, kind of worn out shackles for now, make sure everything fits. And if I have to order a new set of shackles, I guess I gotta order a new set of shackles. I'm not gonna get frustrated about it, or I'm gonna try not to, because it is, setting up these suspensions, like, first of all, it's never gonna hurt me to have an extra set of 2-inch wide, 2¼ inch long shackles. You gotta have enough parts and pieces to put stuff together, and there's enough variety in all of this that you really can end up where I am, where you're ordering parts, you know, and waiting for them to arrive, and then, you know, you're missing one critical little thing to assembling it. So that's enough yakking. Let's maybe we'll just slide the main leaf in and see how that does before we try to assemble this spring. It's probably a pretty good idea. Although, also looking at this, 10, 12. That's 12 leaves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 leaves. We'll probably pull a couple of leaves out of there. That'll both soften the ride and lower it. These are notoriously stiff. And, you know, we could go with a little lower, a little cushier. But let's get the main leaf in. Let's start there. All right, for this next bit, I am going to use my original 2.5-inch shackles instead of my brandy new 2-inch shackles. These are not in the greatest of shape, but they're not terrible. I'm doing that for 2 reasons. One, that's mathematically what's supposed to be right for this arrangement. I want to see if it works. And 2, in theory, I'll be able to slide these guys in without having to stretch the spring outwards. If I use the 2-inch shackles, I'll be a 1/2 inch short on either side and would have to load the leaf spring just enough to get it to, you know, hook into our actual mounts. If I need to shorten it later, I can do that, but this will allow me to get the spring on, and once the rear end's kind of mounted and we, you know, can continue to like make it a thing, it will be easier to put weight on the spring to stretch it if we need to go with shorter shackles. Because right now there's nothing to keep the axle from rolling back and forth if we load it down. So just, you know, saying. Yeah. All right, gang, I've kind of made this as hard as I can make it on myself. Maybe there was an easier way. I don't really know. This panhard bar is gonna be in the way. Means the rear end's gotta go forward, but it's a posi, so everything's gonna turn. Dang it. There it. So the frame's up on a bunch of jack stands. It's one thing about a posi. Everything turns together, which is the point. But you know, oh, nope, that's the way. Oh, come on, man. That tire's kind of flat. So I've got this thing up on jack stands in the back here, obviously, but still, it seems like it's going to be weirdly tight to try to shoehorn this in, because the spring is actually hitting the cross member. Interesting. What is the best way? I mean, I'm going to have to lift this thing another like 8 or 9 inches. Like, it's good gracious. I mean, all right, so here's the current situation. We're tight against the cross member, which is not a good thing. We're not quite centered. You know what? Let's do it. Let's take the wheels off. That'll make our lives a little easier. All right, so this is some really awkward angles to try to show you what's going on. But I went ahead and popped the wheels off our rear end. Our tacked on brackets are still there. That side is just barely started to being, like, that shackle is barely kind of started, but you can see that this shackle actually lines up with the shackle relatively, you know, parallel to the axle. So in theory, when it loads, it should, you know, as this spring gets pushed down, the two ends will get wider, hopefully pushing this out to a 45. So what I'm getting at is maybe the tech guy from Johnny Law was right. I'm not judging you, dude. I just, I've had this go wrong a lot. Come on, little guy. All right, shackles are in. It was a pain. I don't really have a trick for it. You basically, you know, just keep working on it. Tap it, clamp it, then tap it, you know, find a way to make the thing and the other thing. They're always a little bit of a pain. Just fight through it. Try not to break anything. Don't hurt yourself. That said, it looks, you know, both shackles are pretty much horizontal right now, so hopefully when they're loaded, we'll get that 45 we're looking for. All right, so when this thing arrives in the mail, it is, the main leaf is actually detached from it. So no matter what you do, you have to blow the spring pack apart to assemble it. On the one hand, I don't know why they do that. On the other hand, it's kind of convenient. The job we just did, centering the shackles and getting everything in place, is a lot harder when the spring is put together because it's a lot stiffer. That said, because we have to blow this thing apart, I'm inclined to pull at least 2 leaves. A, to get it lower, and B, to soften the ride. Now, a leaf spring will always settle an inch or 2 over time. Like a new spring will kind of settle in about an inch. But you know, we're aiming for low and I'm aiming for comfortable. And these can be pretty stiff. So if I'm wrong, I'm gonna have to put some leaves back in. That's the way it is. Not rocket surgery. You basically want to clamp it because these things are under tension. This is simply because I'm too lazy to walk and get the 9/16 I need for this other side. So it seems that these clamps are actually riveted onto this leaf. I'm not 100% certain if that's true, but we're gonna find out. Gotta go grab some vice grips. This thing is spinning, and it is a rounded kind of head to line up in the center of our cross member. Be right back. All right. Sometimes you need these or vice grips to grab the rounded top of these lineup pins. That can stay in there. Somebody remind me, that's still in there. Back in the day when I put these together, I would put a liberal coating of bearing grease between every single leaf so that the spring didn't bind on itself, that the spring is allowed to do its job and the friction alone wasn't impeding that job. I don't know that I'm going to go through that process this time around, mostly because I'm feeling lazy right now, and honestly I just don't know if it's even going to work the way I want it to. We're going to pull a couple of leaves out, and the question can be, which leaves should a guy pull? I try not to pull 2 next to each other, and I don't know why. It's just sort of an intuition, you know? I've heard, I've read, I think, but I don't know, that the shortest leaves are really your stiffeners. So I'm inclined to take, you know, maybe the top one, and then maybe this one. has our clamps on it, because our clamps aren't going to do much if we don't have the right number of springs. And it is interesting because these clamps are riveted on. I don't love that design. It definitely will hold it stable. But I would imagine you can actually still buy the early Ford original style spring clamps. I don't know how necessary they are. Maybe they're necessary. I don't know. All right, gang, first thing we're doing here is working backwards because I'm an idiot and I forgot that these clamps need to go around the main leaf as well. Do this all stupid because I'm on the wrong side of the thing and I'm, you know, already tucked under here with you guys, so I'm deciding that getting up is harder than doing this. Just remember, guys, this is fun. We do this for fun with our spare time and money. Well, things, fellas. On the one hand, you know, we're somewhat close, but we have to raise this cross member somehow by jacking up the frame elsewhere to get this thing back under. The other thing is I cut these off some time ago, and these are the U-bolts that hold the rear end on because I couldn't get them out. Still can't get them out. And I gotta find a way to get a new set in, because remember I cut those off. Different me went ahead and cut these U-bolts off, really just so I could see how the car looked low. I cut the whole spring out and just dropped it onto the axle. Looked great. The problem is I, you know, have a selection of different U-bolts what hold the spring, you know, onto here. The problem is I can't get the old ones out yet. I keep wanging on them, but they're just hitting this. The curious thing is this doesn't exist. If you go into the trunk, there is no thing here. Let's go. So from the bottom, I thought we had some kind of spare tire recess, but we don't. So what is that weird hump hanging down? It's very strange, but it is causing me a ton of problems. I mean, I will get it out, but it's one of those weird things where if I have to cut them to get them out, how do I get the new ones in? And well, it's possible they put the body down. Well, it's very likely. In fact, they put the body down onto the completed chassis. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's entirely possible this is something they hadn't considered somebody would be doing nearly 80 years later. So I guess it's on me to sort it out. Let's see what we can come up with. There's the weapon used in the crime. So I did everything I could to knock the U-bolts out that were already cut. So I ended up putting a big dent in this and whatever else. Meaning it's pretty clear to me that the chassis were built, they rolled down the assembly line, bam, the body went on, and that was that. So I'm gonna have to find another solution on how to U-bolt these guys back on, because I'm not taking the body off just to get some U-bolts on a cross member. Maybe I can come up this way and saddle it above. I'm not really sure. Either way, I was kind of angry at myself for cutting those things off, and granted that was 10 years ago me, so future me is just dealing with it now. But that said, they would have been too long anyway because our new spring pack is significantly less thick than our stock spring pack. So it would have been, we would have had an issue anyway, and we would have had to either run some like really gnarly ugly spacers or some other thing to make it work anyway. Not, you know, not the worst thing in the world, but again, it's not like it would have gone perfectly otherwise. So, that said, let's figure out what we got to do to move this spring pack line it up with that yonder hole and see what happens. And then we'll see if we can lift the car and put it back on wheels. For any of you guys that have one of these, is this convertible only? This weird, you know, hump? Is it structural? Does anybody know? I don't know, but it's weird. All right, gang, a few things have to happen here. I feel like I'm gonna lift this car 10,000 feet in the air because we don't even have wheels on it, and the spring is not under the cross member. So as much as I'm fretting the U-bolts, I wonder if there's a chance that we're gonna have to pancake that cross member. Jesus. You know, not that I want to get crushed by a Model T or anything, but I'm probably doing this the stupidest way possible. Literally, I don't think I've ever done it like this before. I feel like I've always kind of bolted the spring in to the cross member, then lowered it down onto the rear end. But given my current circumstances, this feels like my best option. Which, being honest, feels really dumb too. Oh, gang. Nothing has been fun about this, and it's all gonna have to come apart. First of all, after I took some leaves out of this pack, the center bolt's not long enough, so we're still a little loose. I just didn't notice it until we got, well, to this point. The next thing I did was I took some U-bolts that I had that were somehow kind of flared out like so. I had to C-clamp them, shove them in the hole, and now they will at least keep, like, friction is holding all that in, so it'll keep the spring from like rocking back and forth, which is kind of what I need to help, you know, finish setting up the rear end. But all of this is gonna get blown apart, and I'm gonna need some more better solutions for this. So I wonder if these welds are actually gonna hold. I hope so. What does that sound? Welds breaking, U-bolts moving, all of the above. Oh yeah. Doesn't feel right either. Dang it. Gang, this is a rough start to old Project Mercury. This stuff's never, like, easy, but I'm getting in my own way more than I thought I would. So I think the spring brackets and everything else are kind of in the right place. Obviously, any weight coming down is rotating our axle because we don't have any radius rods or ladder bars or hairpins or any of the stuff that would A, locate the axle, or B, keep it from twisting. It all has to happen kind of at once, right? Because you sort of need your car at ride height before you can set all this up. But to get it sort of at ride height, you sort of have to have it all kind of mocked up at once. I think I've done this in the wrong order at this point, or at least maybe I should have done it all at once in the garage last weekend and sort of figured out. Well, here's the thing. I thought I could get it to this point and then figure out the radius rods, trailing arms, ladder bars, whatever was going to locate and keep our rear end from twisting. The thing is, between the lack of U-bolts and a bunch of other stuff, I really did think that I'd be able to get the spring kind of in and get it sort of sitting as if it was on the spring. All I've done is create a lever out of these brackets. So at this point, the any weight of the car is just rotating the axle, and it's not doing us any good. Obviously, it's not going to support the weight right now. We need to come up with a system stock. These radius rods would keep the axle from twisting, but so would this big, solid torque tube. And we need to come up with a replacement for it. Got a couple of options. Option A, we snatch those radius rods off. We make some brackets and, you know, kind of figure that out. Option B, we pull the hairpins off the Model T, because I think I got to swap that rear end anyway and see if we can make those work on this car. Option C, we just look for option C. Let's go scavenge. Kind of inclined to pull these hairpins off and take them outside and mock it up and just kind of see how things are. The rear end outside has a bunch of brackets and stuff on it that we might be able to utilize another way, but these things are just barely hanging on. And these aren't even the right axle tube. Plus, I think we're going to swap this rear end out. So, considering we have a lot of axle locating to do, might be a little more old school to try to use the radius rods on this rear end anyway, given the build style we're going to do. So I'm still smoking this over because I do have a lot to work with on this rear end, but let's talk about what's got to happen for rear suspension on a vehicle like this. I'm not an expert on it. This isn't a race car or whatever else, but allow me to demonstrate in the form of sort of an interpretive dance, right? If I'm a solid rear axle and these are the wheels, the rear axle needs to be able to go up and down like so, but it also needs to be able to lean like so, but it also needs to be able to lean and then go up and down, right? So that has to factor in with all of our geometry when we put in these brackets. I don't know why I'm hesitating to just grab the hairpins and kind of like put them in. That may be the best plan. All right, so the hot rod gods are not shining down on me today. I popped the rear spring loose just to kind of reorient myself here. And let's take a look at a couple of things. We got a little gap up here. That's no big deal because I don't have this U-bolt situation sorted out yet. But we are roughly 3.5, 4 inches from connecting our spring to our thing. That's not a big deal. But what that means is this cross member is going to go back up another 3 inches. And look how high this is already off the axle. Plus another 3 inches. This thing is going to be ready for the Baja 500. And that's with a reversed eye spring and a lowering spring and everything else. Granted, we'll split some of this difference when we lose this inch and it settles down, but we're still too high. I mean, you know what I mean? All right, so I threw the hairpins under here. I attached them to the original leftover parts of the trailing arm bracket. That's not gonna work, but that's fine. It's more the geometry. What I want is to try to get these sort of as close to our center line as possible, so if we run along the inside of our frame, K member, X member, whatever member, we should be in relatively good shape. The trick with all this stuff is it all kind of has to happen at once, because in order to put these hairpins in right, we sort of need the car at ride height. And right now, the tail end is indeed above desired ride height. But looking at all the stuff we've got back there, I'm not sure exactly how to bring it down. I've been at this like 12 hours. So, you know. So I think we're kind of gonna have to call it here, guys. I have plenty more work to do, but we've got to pull this rear end back out, cut all the old bracketry off, and weld in or tack in or, you know, bring our axle out here to tack in our hairpin mounts because, well, we need to know where they hit the frame. This is not a great situation. You know, we're inching forward. I think some of this I thought was going to be a little clearer as I went along, but I'm, you know, the hot rod gods can't shine on you every single day. Still, cool project to be working on. Let's just sort of review where we are, because I've gone back and forth on 682,000 things at least that many times. But here's what we learned from today's extravaganza. We must figure out our U-bolt situation, because I've done it by cutting those. That was a mistake. Don't do that, you people out in, you know, TV land. I'm not sure we're going to be quite as low as I wanted to go, but we really got to get weight on the car and see. I think the best bet for locating our axle is going to be our mocked up hairpins that I've kind of shoved in there. They're just kind of hanging in the frame. We'll weld some brackets below the frame. We'll put our other brackets out here as far as we can by our spring hangers, and we're just going to have to 86 the rest of the bracketry that we don't need. Well, this is a guy hesitating right now. All right, let me show you guys what we're thinking here. I've got the hairpins kind of just generally sort of slopped in there. Nothing's even tacked. It's hanging off the frame with a bolt right now. But what it looks like to me is if we sneak this bracket as far out towards our spring hanger as we can get it, and then, you know, rack it as far towards the center of the car as we can on that cross member, weld a bracket to the bottom of the frame there, and we should be pretty good to go. Pretty good to go meaning it's not race car or IndyCar geometry by any stretch of the imagination, but if that's mounted below the frame or just inside the frame when we make a bracket, you know, just a little bit that away, we should have plenty of movement. Although I'm looking at this and we may want to go inboard. Shoot. Are you guys seeing what I'm seeing? Hairpin, frame, frame, hairpin, hairpin, frame. That our best bet might actually be to come in with the hairpin kind of like right here so we stay inside of our frame rails. I don't think we're gonna get the car that low, but I would love to try. So, all right, gang, that was a relatively productive day. Slash 2 days if you consider last Saturday as well, despite the fact that literally nothing is complete and ready to go. That said, we did get the rear end under there. We got the spring hangers on, and it turns out they're in the right place with respect to our new Johnny Law Motors spring. Not sponsored, just saying. Their tech guy was right, measured it correctly according to his suggestions, and it seems to fit. That's good news. Now, we still have to get our axle somehow located in the car and not twisting. We're gonna do that, I believe, with these chrome hairpins that I sort of had mocked up on the T, but we will take these radius rods and kind of make an older school, more hot roddy situation for the T when we get there. That said, we gotta blow it back apart and cut the brackets off the rear end and start to locate the mounts for our hairpins. And we'll come back under and mount our front hairpin mounts somewhere on the cross member of the frame. But that is an entirely involved beast. So that's gonna be it for today. Thank you for watching Between the Sharks. Please consider subscribing. This is gonna be a pretty cool build. It's apparently going to be a challenging one too. So on that note, good luck on your projects. Thanks for watching as always. We'll see you next time on Between the Sharks.